Welcome to another episode of Mafia Monday with Jason Jordan. So today I want to talk about Operation Underworld. Operation Underworld was a federal government program that was working with the Mafia during World War II. A lot of people don't believe or don't think about some of the extensive nature that our government has gone over the years to do things that are pretty surprising when you think about it, like Operation Paperclip. We brought a bunch of Nazis back to America who were scientists and who were working with Nazi scientists look at von Braun, he helped us get to the moon, right? He was the rocket specialist back then. They had the V-2 rockets because of him. So during World War II, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor happens, so we're brought into the war. By February of 1942, the USS Normandy catches fire off the docks of New York City. Now, it's not Normandy like we invaded Normandy, different Normandy, but that was the name of the ship. It catches fire, and people immediately think it's German sabotage, right? It's German spies that burned the ship down. A lot of people think it was the Mafia that did it itself to be able to concoct what happens next. The legend has it, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, says, we need to control the docks. We need to make it safe. We can't have that, right? They had lights out in New York City at night. They had seen German submarines off the coast. They knew they were there, and they knew we caught spies who would literally come out of a sub onto a little skip boat and get onto the shores and come in to do things. We arrest them, catch them, execute them. So we knew that was going on. That was a little bit down the road, actually, because this is right as our involvement into the war. The Normandy catches fire, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt wants it protected. Well, he's told, we don't really control the docks. And his response allegedly was, what the hell do you mean we don't control the docks? Well, the Mafia, Lucky Luciano, controls the docks. Well, Lucky had already been locked up. He had been in prison for 7 years, I think, 7 years, something like that, for the prostitution ring that he was running, and they locked him up for, which we'll talk about in another episode. But Luciano's rotting away in a jail. He's got his buddies from Genovese and Costello and Meyer Lansky working to get him out. The appeals process, trying to get the sentence reduced. You got 55 years for prostitution. It was clearly a signal sent just to, stomp on him, basically, and put him away. So was it his idea to then show how needed he is? I don't know. But he was a pretty clever motherfucker. Ultimately, the Navy comes to him in prison and says, we need your help. And that's Operation Underworld. He basically offered to secure the docks, offered any help with the invasion of Sicily that they would need, because he had that type of power, and they were going to let him out of prison, but at the end of the war, and it was never to be made public. That was the deal. What's really interesting about the whole thing is if you rewind back a number of years, Thomas Dewey, who was at the time the district attorney who put him in jail, he put Luciano in prison. He was going after Dutch Schultz. Dutch Schultz was going to try to kill Dewey because he was so frustrated. But again, there's rules. You can't kill law enforcement. Dutch Schultz goes to the commission, says, I want to kill him. Anastasia actually plots it out and says, it's possible, we can get to him. And the commission says, no, we don't do that here in America. We're not killing law enforcement. So Luciano actually saves Dewey's life. Well, he says, screw you guys, I'm killing him anyway. And that was the end of Schultz. You see him with the famous picture of his head in the soup bowl. Luciano and the commission decided to take him out shortly thereafter, within a few days, I think. So now what is Dewey going to do? Well, he turns his eyes to the biggest target, which is Luciano. So by Luciano not letting Schultz kill Dewey, they killed Schultz instead. Now Dewey turns on Luciano. So he comes after Luciano. He winds up putting him in prison for 55 years. Fast forward to World War II, Dewey is now the governor. You all remember the famous picture of Dewey. Dewey wins. Truman's holding it up. He runs for president in 54. He runs for president against Truman. And not 54, that would have been 46, right? Something like that. He runs, 46. He runs for president and Truman wins, but the actual news articles say Dewey wins. And Truman's holding up the newspaper laughing because really he won. So Dewey really planned out his political aspirations really well. First a DA, goes after the Mafia, makes himself very popular, becomes governor of New York, and then he runs for president. So when he's governor of New York, he has Luciano where he wants him in a prison. And World War II winds down, so you go from 42 to the end of when the Normandy catches fire, Operation Underworld begins. Luciano then, he works with the government to make sure the docks are secure, there's no more fires, and he offers his services to help with any invasion in Sicily, which does happen down the road. Whether they really helped or not, I don't know. I'm not sure they really needed it that much. The Italians really didn't want to fight that much with the Nazis. They didn't like Mussolini very much at that point. But nevertheless, that gets put in place. Well, 3 years, 2 months later, 3 years, 3 months later, the Nazis surrender, right? A couple months after that, Japan surrenders. World War II's over. Now he wants out of prison. Well, guess who has to sign off on him getting out of prison? Dewey, who's now the governor of New York, and is furious that the federal government cut this deal to let him out of prison. He spent so many years going after this guy and had to concoct many ways to get him by basically using heroin-addicted prostitutes that were going to say anything to get their necks fixed and get the fix and get out of jail. So he was very angry, signed off. Luciano gets out, but he has to leave. He has to go to Italy. So he goes back to Italy, but he doesn't want to, right? He wants to stay in America. He built an empire here. But around the same time, this is before Castro takes over, the Italian mob, Meyer-Lansky, they're moving casinos into Cuba. They had started out in Vegas, but Cuba's 90 miles off the American coast. And they had a very corrupt politician in Batista who's running Cuba at the time, who was going to let them do whatever they wanted. So they invested a ton of money in Cuba. The casinos are coming up. They're making a boatload of money. So Luciano, he has sent back to Italy. He comes to Cuba. Now he's 90 miles off the coast. Well, the U.S. government finds out. They pressure him. They pressure Batista, get him out. They send him back ultimately to Italy, which he was really upset at that point because he was completely gone from all of North America, right? That whole environment that he helped create and make so profitable was being pulled from him completely. And his friends now were left to run it. Left for another day, we'll talk about Castro and we'll talk about Batista and Cuba and how I really believe that played into the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But brief history on Operation Underworld and how our government was actually working with the mob, which is really interesting because at the same time, the head of the FBI, right, J. Edgar Hoover, refused to admit there even was a mafia, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we can get into in another time. But on the one hand, FBI is telling the public there is no organized crime syndicate in this country. On the other hand, the federal government and the United States military were working actively with them to help protect the coastline of the eastern seaboard, basically, during World War II. So it's a really fascinating piece of history. Again, whether Luciano concocted it from the beginning to put himself in a position where he could get out of prison finally, and he hoped it would lead for him his ability to get back into America or not, I don't know. I don't know if anyone will ever know, but just another fascinating piece of history and how the Mafia played a huge part in American history, even with World War II.